In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. Now, good old 5 loaves and 2 fish. We don't have an indication from the text about whether or not throughout the crowd people made inquiries, is there anyone that has any food? We don't know whether the small boy, seeing with the same eye as God, saw the need and brought what he had as an offering. Or whether or not he was merely asked and he said, yes, my mom has packed me a lunch and here it is. But if we can imagine for a minute that the first is true, then what a beautiful thing. Sometimes my grandson will find a coin or something on the floor of our house, and he will pick it up and he will come running either to me or to Tasuni, and he'll say, we have to give this to the poor. You know, now, if he has that same penny or coin in his hand when he's at Toys R Us, then no one is poor, because he knows some other things to say as well. Jesus will give them because we are always saying that Jesus gives us. Jesus gives us, and we point to the various things that we have, the luxuries of life, and truly we receive them from the hand of God. But every once in a while, my grandson, who is not yet 4, will come up with something that is incredibly profound. And it never fails to bring a tear to my eye when he does it. And he doesn't understand why I receive what he has done with that kind of emotion. He doesn't understand it at all. But it's because of the purity of his nature expressing itself. And then I look at myself and I said, well, where does the purity of my nature express itself? Because I'm supposed to know these things. I am supposed to do these things. All of the holy things I am supposed to evince in my life. And sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. But when you see it in an unexpected way, you think about the way in which the Lord himself is pleased to see that the imprint of his handiwork in us is so manifest. When you see one of the little ones do something that you know is difficult, sharing a favorite toy, or it was just Valentine's Day and in my grandson's school they had a giant party and everyone received Valentines and candy and there was all kinds of stuff, and yet you saw little kids sharing. They all had exactly the same thing. It was all parceled out. There are 17 children in my grandson's class, and everybody got identical gifts. The teacher gave a little teddy bear to each of them, but they were sharing. They were sharing. How infrequently we share. How infrequently we share. When I go to the supermarket, most of the time I only carry a credit card. I do not carry any cash. And so I pay for it, I get a receipt, I go home, I put it in my checkbook, and occasionally there are times when there is somebody outside of the supermarket who is asking for charity. So I went to, I didn't have anything to give the person as I passed them by, having only the credit card, so I took $20 out at the end of my transaction, and I asked, could I have it in change, not a $20 bill. I wasn't going to give $20 because I halfway suspected that perhaps I was participating in a scam. I wanted to give something, but I didn't want to give $20. A woman preceded me out of the store. A woman about 35, really attractive, well dressed, and she had a bag. Now as I passed this person, it was just a person sitting in, like a heap of clothing, and they had a cardboard sign, and I didn't even realize what the cardboard sign said. One, because my vision at night is diminished now as I've gotten older. But number two, I just don't look at the cardboard signs. I always wonder, how does the homeless person always wind up with a Sharpie and cardboard? Is there a place where they go, like the homeless people Sharpie and cardboard store? Where do they get, they write these signs, and I'm suspicious. Because when I was a young man, about 17, I had friends, and we used to go to the airport and beg quarters. Now it sounds silly, but in 1964, a quarter bought a lot. And what we would do is we'd go up to people that were getting off of airplanes, and we'd say, I have to get in touch with my ride. My ride isn't here. I need a quarter for the phone. I don't know who thought this scam up, but we could get approximately, well, even on a bad day, 10 people would, if you spent like an hour at the airport, 10 people would give you a quarter. It's a quarter. And here's this young person in the airport, and it seems like it's a legitimate request. And I remind you that a McDonald's hamburger was 19 cents. So this is how much a quarter was in 1964. So you can get the ratio of what it is today. So we would do this, and because I participated in that woeful act, I'm now suspicious of anybody who sits and begs, because I know again that I must have some relative who's out on the street right now. And I know you've all heard the story, because it can't be that I'm the only one that gets these things. There was a guy who would beg on Wall Street, and he did it for a living, and he made more than $50,000 a year as a beggar on Wall Street. He came by the subway with a briefcase and a three-piece suit. He'd take the clothes off, put on rags, and go and badger people for $1 or $2 or $10 or whatever it was he thought that he could get from them, and he made an entire living doing this. So there's this woman outside of Stater Brothers where I shop, and this young, attractive woman, well dressed, comes up and gives this woman an entire bag of groceries. And then I look at the sign, and the sign says, I am a mother, and I have children, and my children are hungry, and they need milk. Oh. This was after I got close enough to her to give her my money. $5, right? How parsimonious. How low. You see, I'm telling you this not for you to have anything except the concept in your mind about what purity is like, and how a small child may have seen the same thing that God Himself saw. Remember when He asked Philip, what are we going to do? It said in the Bible, He already knew what He was going to do. He already knew. But it might have been that this little boy saw with the same eyes as Jesus. It reminds me of another vignette. There was a man who was horribly, horribly scarred in his face by fire. His face looked like a candle that had melted. It was horrible. It was bumps all over his face, bluish and purple and red, and there was hardly any skin that looked like human skin. And he too had a grandchild. And this grandchild never failed to run up to him and throw his arms around his grandfather and kiss him on that face that looked like a mask of horror. See, that's the kind of thing that makes me weep. It makes me weep because now you are in contact with real purity. Real purity. And how often do you see real purity? How often? I will never forget the young girl at Columbine, and everybody should have remembered her name, Cassie Bernal. When those two young men who had the weapons in the library said, "Is anybody here a Christian?" she alone stood up and they shot her to death. It's the type of purity that I hope one day I will myself show forth. I used before the word events, but it means to show forth, to manifest, to demonstrate without equivocation the absolute purity. Now, there are some people for whom we will do this easily, but will we do it generally for humanity? We are told, and we use the same lips to pronounce the words, that we are all brothers and sisters. But are we all really brothers and sisters? Or do we have special groups? I prefer this one, and I do not prefer that one. So when I think about the kindness of the Lord, He made them sit down because there was grass in that place. It was a place like you might imagine a park to be. And then He said, "Father." He raised His eyes to heaven and prayed, and His Father received His words and blessed the offering, and it came pouring forth. That's the way a kind and a good act will do out of the will or the heart of man when you do something like this young woman did. She read the sign. She looked at the person's humanity. She identified with the woman. She went inside and bought her every single thing that she thought that young children would need. And I gave them $5. I didn't even read the sign. And when I go into a store to shop, I go in like a general trying to take over a city. I go really fast. If there are 30 things on my list, I can get out in just about 35 seconds. That's an exaggeration, but and so when I'm moving and doing a job, I am very, very, very quick. So I didn't pay attention. And sometimes one of the things that we need to do in order that we see another person's humanity is to slow ourselves down and take a look at them. This is why we do so much better one-on-one than we do with a crowd. A crowd of people irritates us. We want them to go away. I've said sometimes to my own dishonor that I had wished I had a gun on each fender of my car to simply shoot the other cars so that I could go more rapidly through the traffic jams that are part and parcel of our life in Southern California. And it's because I relegate my humanity to a position much more highly exalted than that of everybody else that I'm sharing the roadway with. And that's just wrong. It's absolutely wrong. So I hope that a cry didn't go out amongst the populace on that day. I hope that people weren't looking for food and all that they found was the little boy with the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. I hope that the little boy, seeing with the eyes of his Lord and his Master, I hope that that little boy, having the imprint of God upon him, I hope that that little boy, being of that spirit, did what needed to be done. Because insofar as that happened, he is an archetype for all of us and a model for our behavior, and he grants dignity to our race by his action of sacrifice, giving up his lunch for strangers. How much more of an intimate sacrifice is there than that? Feeding somebody else with your own food, not extra food, your only food. I don't know what his name is, but God bless him. Glory be to God.